Welcome, everyone, to Preparing History Students for the Workforce, Faculty Perspectives on Essential Employability Qualities, or EEQ Certification. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. I'm Julia Brookins, Senior Program Analyst for Teaching and Learning at the American Historical Association. I'll be moderating today's panel. Throughout my time at the AHA, we've worked with higher education faculty to help clarify and communicate the value that historical study contributes to the college experience, whether through a history major, as we'll be discussing today, or through general education, as represented in the History Gateways Initiative and the resulting booklet from last year, Designing Introductory History Courses for Student Success. Today, you'll hear from 5 historians at different institutions about what they've done to support students by building into their history programs elements and components to directly address student employability. They have all worked with the QA Commons to assure quality and offer skills badging along students' path to graduation. We will begin with brief introductions and a few of my questions for each of the panelists, and we will reserve time at the end of the hour for attendee questions. This event is part of AHA Learn, a series of online programs that provide a forum for compelling ideas and important conversations in history education. Thank you so much to Michelle Deasy and QA Commons for approaching the AHA with this valuable opportunity for history departments to focus on improving student pathways to future work. I'll briefly introduce our speakers. Edward Holt is Associate Professor at Grambling State University, where he's Interim Department Chair and Coordinator of the MA Social Science Program. The Grambling State University History Department received the AHA's 2024 Equity Award, recognizing its outstanding efforts in recruiting and retaining underrepresented groups within the historical discipline. William Kuracina is Professor of History at East Texas A&M University. Among other roles, he has served as History Department Head and the Dean of the University's College of Humanities, Social Sciences, and the Arts. Bonnie Rock-McCutcheon is Assistant Professor at Wilson College in Delaware. She teaches a diverse range of courses in history, ancient world studies, and Latin. She experiments with innovative pedagogical techniques such as reacting to the past simulations and virtual reality applications to help students engage with the past in dynamic ways. Jonathan Rees is Professor of History at Colorado State University, Pueblo, where he teaches courses across U.S. history. He currently serves as Assistant Chair, Department of History and Political Science. Finally, Matt Romaniello is Professor of History at Weber State University in Ogden, Utah. He is the author and editor of a number of books on early modern Russia and has edited the Journal of World History and Siberica, Interdisciplinary Journal of Siberian Studies. And he'll have to leave 15 minutes early. If attendees have a specific question for him, please submit it through the Q&A function as soon as possible. So now we're going to get straight to it. My first question for each of you, could you briefly describe your degree program and your students and tell us what you were hoping to improve or to learn by participating in the EEQ Certification and Student Employability Badging Project? We can go in the order of the introductions if that's okay with you.
And that puts me first. So like the introduction said, I am here at Grambling State University. We are an HBCU, historically Black university. In our Department of History, we have about between 60 and 70 majors. We have a general history major, and then we have 2 concentrations, one in law and society and one in social studies education. We also house a master's in social sciences. So a little bit about the program and then why I was drawn to this. I once had a student a couple years ago turn in a resume that took one of my learning outcomes and put that as something that she learned in her resume as like a deliverable. And I said, we can do better than that. Surely there's some way that we can better articulate the things that we're doing in the classroom in ways that students can absorb it and be able to articulate it to employers. And that's sort of where I see QA Commons coming in, that initial conversation that I had with Michelle about ways that we can take what we're already doing and make it transparent to a variety of stakeholders.
Okay, so East Texas, we've got I'd say about 50 undergraduates and maybe 24 graduate majors. And focusing on the undergrads especially, right? That's well, I think that we are traditionally a teacher prep university, and so our majors are fairly straightforward, this, that, and the other. And so, right, the idea of employability, right, helps answer that age-old question: what can I do in the history degree? Right. It's a key ingredient to our program successes, right? That's, I think, a good chunk of it is that, um, right, students have to recognize the value that we offer. Employers do recognize, but could do a better job recognizing the value of the skills that we teach. Employability then really kind of bridges those kinds of priorities. And it's also a question of, I mean, universities are consistently under immense pressure to grow their programs, grow your headcount majors. And so, right, practically speaking, we have to devise ways to outreach to student populations that are not destined to be teachers, right? That's so, right? Employability is a way to not be stagnant. Swamps are stagnant. Programs should be dynamic and exciting, right? So it's an opportunity to invigorate our offerings.
So Wilson College, which is actually in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, not in Delaware. I must
Oh,
have
I'm
missed that
sorry.
when I looked at the bio earlier. Although I'm seeing it now. Oops. Wilson College is much smaller than Grambling State and East Texas. We have actually just had record enrollment, which has put us at about 1,700 headcount total, including an online college. We probably have less than 1,000 certainly in our traditional on the ground college. We're a 4-year liberal arts private institution. We were one of the first women's colleges in the country, not the first, but one of, in 1869. But we went coeducational 10 years ago because of financial pressures largely. And our students, we have a lot of first generation college students. The students who come here are really concerned with what they're going to do after graduation. Our biggest majors are things like veterinary nursing, education, business, things that students and parents see as leading directly to jobs. And so if I want to attract students, I need to show them how history can lead them directly to a job. And I guess in terms of my numbers, um, I'm really envious of you guys for having literally dozens of majors. I have 9 at the moment, which I'm quite proud of, actually. That's a good number for us. But so this project was really interesting to me because it was a way for me to figure out how to better articulate what I'm doing in the classroom, and then to articulate that to students and to their parents, but also to help them articulate that to employers and hopefully sort of expand the number of students who might see history as a degree that would then lead directly to employment.
I think I'm up next. I am at Colorado State University, Pueblo. We are a regional comprehensive university in the area of Southern Colorado that you may have driven through, but probably didn't stop. There are about 4,000 students at the university. We have about 60 majors. Well, and we're also Hispanic serving. That's pretty important if I didn't say that already. I was interested in the program. I think I remember the conversation with Michelle where she very much stressed that we're not suggesting that you change the way you teach. We're suggesting that you talk about the way you teach differently. And so by going through this, I managed to understand all these things that I did usually and my colleagues did usually, and to talk about them in ways that they'll be more appealing. Because I know what I do and what I find appealing, but it's important to note that what we think is the best part of the history major is not necessarily what the students think is the best part of the history major, their parents think is the best part of the history major, or their potential employers after they graduate. And so it's not a gigantic change to simply stress different parts of what you're already doing. It's an education for me, and I've really enjoyed it, and I'm grateful to talk about it here.
And I think that what I will say will sound familiar. But so we're slightly larger than everyone else here. So Weber State is an open enrollment regional university. We have about 200 majors. About half of those are in history education, and half of those are straight history majors. And what I think our goals were is very similar to what's been said. So we have a career day every spring where people from the community who either have a history background or are working in some sort of history related field come and meet our majors, which has been really valuable. We've done this now for more than a decade. But every year, the feedback we get from those employers is that our students are not great about talking about what skills they've learned. Since they're sort of a familiar group and many people come back every year, it ends up frequently with the employers explaining to our students what they learned in their major that might be helpful in their careers. And part of this is to sort of think about how we can finally flip that equation and be more involved, I think, in ahead of time, getting those ideas out to our students so that they're prepared to have sort of more meaningful conversations and think about future employment tracks and what's possible. Because we haven't done enough. And so I think this process has been thinking through where can we make improvements to make that process more transparent for our students.
Thank you all. What did the process entail, and what did you and others in your program do? I'm also interested, if you can speak to this, what roles did students play in the process, if any? And you can just, whoever has the first answer can respond.
I was actually just talking about precisely this to somebody this morning, so I'm prepped with a good starter answer. I did this in part, me and one of my colleagues went through this in part because we were doing our 5-year program review at the same time. So I figured there'd just be a lot of overlap. And there is a lot of overlap, but while the university for our program review was interested in what's in our catalog and what's in our syllabi, QA Commons is interested in actual assignments. QA Commons is interested in what the extracurriculars are. So it's a more comprehensive process that gets much closer to the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day of what history professors do, rather than the sort of check off the box process that gets you certified for another 5 years.
In terms of the process, it was really, really easy. I found myself very overwhelmed in the fall semester because of some extra classes that were given to me at the last minute. And I emailed Michelle, like, I can't get this done. And Michelle emailed me back and she was like, well, just send me all your syllabi. And then we Zoomed a couple times. And next thing I know, she had written the report. So I felt like we started and I had this big paper that I was supposed to write. And I ended up not having to write the paper. So it was a really easy process from my end.
Yeah, I can echo what Bonnie said for that. I think was such an easy process because I think QA Commons are such great thought partners in this, and they've been doing this exact work. And so from my end, we submitted our syllabi, and then we had several Zoom conversations. There's also a form that sort of is starting to ask these starter questions about various domains. And I think the interesting thing about that process was it didn't just ask what's going on with your classes. It's asking you things like, what are the ways that you engage with your alumni? What are the ways that you make things transparent to students? And so it's really getting at these other areas where we've been doing stuff, and it became apparent in conversations that we've been doing these things. It's just sort of emphasizing for us which of these things to make more systematic, which of these things to make more habitual. And then the end, or the next result was, after these conversations, we got a 35-page report that talks in depth about the program and breaks it down in those domains. And currently we're in conversation with QA Commons about that next step, which is the badging and the things to add into people's LinkedIn profiles to make all of that report succinct and transparent to both students and employers.
And the report is really great because then that gives us something concrete that we could take to deans, provosts, presidents, and say, these are the things that we're doing. These are the things we need to do better. And I mean, everybody's all about data these days. So it gives us that data to back up many things that we already knew.
And
But
highlights things that you don't know. Like there's
that's
something
true.
in my report was like, oh, we need to do that more intentionally. Okay, cool. It's interesting to see how certain industries are perceiving the things that we kind of do without actually knowing that it's something worthwhile.
Well,
Thank you. Go ahead.
For us, our process really focused in on right, we've been doing right the kinds of learning outcomes and stuff for a good dozen years. So right, focusing in on what we were expecting students to have accomplished wasn't very new. There's a nuance to it. But I mean, we also fell into the trap of not taking into account the student perspective. Right, that ours was, for lack of a better phrase, top-down, faculty-driven. These are the benefits we're bestowing on our students, kind of a thing. And so, right, there is that kind of a, well, okay, let's be more intentionally introspective about what it is that we're doing here, in ways that does actually communicate the value of what it is that we're doing.
Specifically to the students who have to be the ones who carry that to employers and out.
Yes,
into the
correct.
world.
And also recognize the value of enrolling in the first place.
Yes. Well, my next question gets to those reports that you referenced. All of your programs were praised for embedding critical thinking, communication, and professionalism. How did your faculty go about intentionally developing those skills in their courses, or in your courses, I should say?
Here's the interesting thing, and I think other panelists would probably say this from the review. I think everybody's programs are already doing it. I think what we're not doing is putting it in the languages that speaks to industry professionals. And so this report is a way to get that language that industry professionals, business people that say, what is your major offer? It bridges that gap between what is happening in the classrooms, and I suspect everybody's classrooms, most people's classrooms, and then putting it in intelligible languages for those business and those employers.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the idea of being praised for critical thinking and communication, these are self-evident truths, right? And so it's really a question of, and we also know that these are the soft skills that are absolutely treasured by all employers. But so, right, we're hitting the target, but it's not a bullseye. And I think that, right, this process is affording a level of clarity that we hadn't had before.
There were a lot of things that we're already doing that I think Michelle was a little bit surprised that we were doing in history. So especially things that connect digital skills to history, like the use of GIS, story maps, digital posters. And these are things that I think we're not unusual in doing. In fact, I know we're not unusual in doing, but they're things that other people don't associate with history. When they think of us, they think that we read heavy books and write papers and maybe have a discussion once in a while. And I think that's probably not typical of many, many history courses. And so thinking a little bit about that has really helped me to think about how I communicate, how I talk to people about what we're doing, and lead with, you're going to learn these other skills as well, that it's about how you present your research as well as doing the research.
So several of you, if we can move on, if somebody else wants to get back to this, feel free. But making essential employability qualities more visible to your students did emerge as a common challenge. What exactly are you trying to do or considering to help students recognize and articulate the skills they're building? How do you get that to the students?
I added a section to my syllabi this semester in the objectives section where I talked about employability objectives. And on all of my explicitly history courses, I was proud to say that we had been certified by QA Commons. I figured that might be an added bonus for students. But students I have found, really welcome explicit talk about these things. Some of them actually commented to me that they were surprised to see this. But I've found that both with my majors and with the many, many non-majors who take my class, it's given me a new language to use when we're talking about things that they're going to do that they might not necessarily want to do, like oral presentations. And it's actually helped me to sort of hold the line on, I'm not a fan of the word rigor, but I guess the standard that I want to keep. And push back sometimes when they say, well, I can't do that. I'm too anxious. I'm too this, I'm too that. No, this is something that we want you to graduate with this skill because it's a skill that you need when you go out in the world.
What I've done is convince all of my colleagues to change our student learning outcomes. And this requires a little bit of context that I'm sure all the historians on this call will be familiar with, where the assessment system comes at you and they're looking for numbers and reports, and you sort of come up with this fake sort of thing that's all, nailing Jello to the wall, and nobody's really helped by this process. I literally stole. I mean, I'm supposed to, the QA Commons SLOs for the department because they are more useful and more accessible. And I told everyone, this doesn't mean that you have to stop doing what you're doing. You're still teaching content. But now, if we have something that we can actually point to, like we're doing better at this because there are 3 more assignments in these classes, then we can actually, keep this certification and actually be improving and making the program more useful instead of going through this sort of game where we're just checking boxes in order to get through the year. So I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, I think that to echo, right, the idea of conveying value, right, making sure that the students are aware of the skills that they are learning and avoiding, right, just this idea that, well, that it's complacent, that it's compliance is complacent, right? So it's not just about going through the process, it's about being intentional and diligent about it and then following up. Right? That admittedly is a layer that I've got to introduce into my classes where, right, students are coming away from a semester-long experience. Why did we just do any of that? Okay. So, right, close that loop.
And so I also put them as a second section of sort of learning objectives. But the other thing I'm doing is, as we're thinking about these sort of reflexive exercises, as sort of like, how's the class going at midterm, or how's the class go at the end of the year, have a really discrete component that says, these are the employability skills that we talked about. If you were in a job interview, how would you articulate what we're doing in this class, to sort of start that conversation before they are at that stage, so that it becomes sort of ingrained and habitual, that they're starting to think at all stages, how is this course? What can I take from this course to convey to an employer?
Thank you. And I think you've all addressed a little bit, Matthew, if you'd like to do this, you may.
We're at the sort of very start of the process. I mean, so
Okay.
we've submitted a lot of materials and are waiting. I'm actually sitting here taking notes. to think
Very
about.
good. You're not
Um,
alone.
Yeah, so part of our plan was really we have an introductory course for our majors that they're supposed to take in their first year or two at the latest to talk about basic skills, and the intention always was to sort of build these in at the start. And so while we're remapping that course, these are sort of the skills that we want to get right at the front. And my hope is that we'll be a little bit less obsessed with worrying about citation on day one than we have been, because starting that as a conversation about what are the skills you're going to gain by the time you finish, I think is going to be more helpful for us as a department as we move through the major.
Thank you. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit based on that. I'd like to hear a little bit about the internship program you have at Weaver State. But first, if you guys could briefly, you've alluded to this a little bit, that using employability language and putting those skills in front of the students early gets their attention in a different way, whether it be so they don't complain as much about having to do an oral presentation, or they sort of orient themselves to what they're doing in a more explicit way. But before you began the certification process, were considerations of history majors employability already a part of your conversation among your history department colleagues? And if not, how did you build their buy-in? Yuri's silence fell over the group.
I'll
We
try it.
don't need to name any names. My general sense from having worked with a lot of history departments is that there tends to be kind of a third, a third, a third. So depending on how large your department is, that might still be significant. People who are willing to go along with it. People who don't care one way or the other, as long as you don't ask them to do too much extra work. And then people who are opposed to it and will express it in more or less voluble ways, depending on the setting. So was it a case of moving ahead with the Coalition of the Willing, or did you do special things to try to help your colleagues accept and feel positive about the process?
I can do this. In our case, very small department, 4 faculty members, and we all were concerned not so much about employability, but the drop off in majors that has affected all history departments and everything in the humanities. So anything we could do to attract majors had a positive reception. And I did get some help doing this. So I had, 50% of the department was working on the application, and the rest of it knew it was coming and was delighted to see the results. So that was our, I mean, it's not like a club because we're not wielding it against everyone, but that was the environment that was created that led us to do this.
And I think one of the benefits in our conversations with Michelle was, we didn't have to submit every syllabi, but what they asked of us is what are the common core experience that they have? What is a set of classes that every student will be able to take so that you can have confidence that from your first year to the point of graduation, that they'll have that common experience. And so then you not necessarily skirting around individuals, but you're making sure that you don't have to get the 100% buy-in at the beginning. And then the other thing is thinking about the different stakeholders. And if you're thinking about the students as a stakeholder, I think it's probably more important to get their buy-in because that's the group that you're trying to help at the end of the day.
Well, and I think that the idea of employability is actually an old conversation that a good many of us have been avoiding, right? That having a conversation about teaching skills isn't necessarily what we do. It's vocational education, and that's not what our discipline's all about. And so I think it's, right, there's an opportunity for proper translation, right, across colleagues as well here. And so, right, that the process shows that we are doing these elements that discreetly. And so, right, the buy-in comes from, okay, well, you really don't necessarily need to be doing anything differently, right? That we just as a program have to be having conversations about how we're doing it coherently. And so, right, it makes it more intentional in that sense, right? That my colleagues and I are just now, maybe a semester or two ago, just beginning to have conversations about what the other people are doing in the classes, right? Because, you know, everybody's doing such a wonderful job and we know it, right? We've fallen victims of our own conviction in that sense. And so, right, all right, let's have a conversation about, right, moving it forward and, right, taking that next step, because the other part of our conversation is that we have, right, the university's quality enhancement program that is about career readiness. It's all about skills, and it's not even a year old now. So, okay, part of the buy-in can be that, look, it places us at near the forefront of the university conversations about what it is that we're doing here, right? It garners the positive attention that we need moving forward.
Yes, I think that is often an important dynamic to show others with decision-making power that, hey, the historians are people to go to if you want to see how this is working, and to show that you're amenable and active is an important thing to be able to do. I would like to get a little bit into some of the other feedback from the reports, and then I'm going to ask about the internship program at Weber State. So first, though, as historians, we like to highlight how versatile a history major can be for students' future careers. But students might not know very much about the full range of possibilities, and even if they do, all those possible options can be overwhelming and hard to act on. If we think in terms of pathways toward traditional history careers, that's sort of teaching, museums, archives, public history, cultural heritage, and in terms of skills-based careers, law and policy, business, data analysis, and journalism, writing or publishing. And then as a third sort of path, interest-based careers like creative industries, nonprofits, or specialized fields built on individual students' passions. And I would like to thank Michael Edmondson of New Jersey Institute of Technology for this succinct formulation. Feedback from this initiative with QA Commons included the suggestion that programs should help students explore beyond traditional history fields. What do you do, or what are you considering doing to help support students' career exploration beyond traditional history-related careers? For instance, in business, nonprofit, or media sectors? And I will now combine this with the next question and ask what's going on at Weber State.
Yeah, it's just I think so. One of the things is that we've always had this, at least now for almost 15 years, we've done a career day, which is partially fueled by keeping in contact with our alumni, figuring out where they are and what they're doing, and then also being in touch with all those local institutions, archives, museums, and sort of having a bunch of people in the room that can talk about all the different things they do has been really helpful. That frequently has launched the internships. We run internships all year long, but it's been really helpful for students to meet people who are willing to work with interns to figure out that that's a pathway. I think even when that doesn't turn into a career, and more often than I get surprised by it does, because it shocks me. But it's been helpful just for students to realize that they have done things here that actually have value out in the world. Like that becomes a real world example for them that I don't think we could convince them of in the classroom. I think that experience itself, being out in the world, having conversations with, having an outside boss, talking to them about what they're doing and why they're doing it and what skills they need to get it done, has been really helpful in making that transition for us. So part of it is, so Weber State has internships basically in most programs. There's a standardized contract, there's a standardized number of hours. It's 30 hours in the workplace for 1 credit hour. Students can negotiate with the outside person and decide whether they're going to do 1, 2, or 3 credit hours. When the contract gets signed, it gets signed in the department and with the site supervisor, their boss, and the student up ahead of time. We have at least a couple check-ins during the semester to make sure it's going with both the site supervisor and the student. And they have to turn in some version of whatever project they've been working on to us, which is what their final grade is. In the end, a lot of the most successful ones have been with people that we've worked with for years. So archives and special collections on campus have done all sorts of things. Students have worked on digitization projects, on transcriptions, on public exhibits. In Utah, there's a series of local archives. The archive for Northern Utah is actually at Weber State. And so a lot of the projects we're running are partially for these big projects for the state. There was a commemoration of women's suffrage, and we had students that were out interviewing women with their experiences in the past about what had been done and what did suffrage mean to them. And a couple years ago, we did a project on World War II and mobilization, which transformed this part of the state. And so they're using history skills and then getting things done and bringing those forward. But we've also been equally successful with Hill Air Force Base has its own museum. They always take some interns that are working on history projects and heritage projects for them. The Union Station museums, because we're not far from Promontory Point. The museum is here in town. They're always running exhibits and demonstrations, and that's running with students quite often. They take a lot of ownership in those projects quite often because those are very big public exhibits out in the world, and that gives them something that they can then talk about with employers. I think has been really successful. But we actually have also formed some relationships with publishers, sometimes business people, definitely local lawyers have taken on interns. And so I think it's been a really beneficial experience. It gives students, as they're sort of halfway through their program, this opportunity to be out in the world, to sort of think about what have I done? How could that be useful? And as I said, the moment every year when that career day meeting happens is the employers come back and be like, I once again had to tell your students that learning how to research can be really helpful in my field. And I was like, yes, we tell them that all the time, but apparently it's more meaningful when it comes from someone that's not us. And so I think that's been really productive. And it checks a lot of those boxes about sort of forging relationships with the local community. We get to highlight all those whenever we have to generate a report for our administration, look at all these amazing things our students are doing out in the world. And a lot of those students who've gone off to do internships and then gotten jobs will be the people that in a few years come back for career day. And so that can be a really important peer experience where you have people that have just recently graduated coming back to talk to our majors about how much this worked for them. I think has done a lot to sort of make that a successful program over the years.
I think one of the things that this EEQ process has pushed us to do is to lean into that near peer engagement, like was just being mentioned, because we had started keeping a database of, where our alumni are doing to generate reports. But really one of those areas of questions that QA Commons asks is the engagement with alumni and how you're making what they're doing transparent. And so it pushed us to think in a couple ways. One way last week, a couple weeks ago, we held a pre-law day where we invited a student alumni from us who is now going to graduate from law school in the spring to come and talk about that process, along with some regional and national law schools, as a way to sort of demystify that process and say, hey, you're in this program, this is where this person is, you can go in that same way. It's also pushed us to learn some really interesting examples. Like Michelle mentioned, there was a department that did an alumni newsletter. And I was like, we could do an alumni newsletter. And so we've done about 4 of them now. And students are responding back and really getting re-engaged and saying, what they're doing and how excited they are to actually hear about the things that are going on in the department. And then lastly, it pushed us to take our database and make it more transparent. So if you go to our website for the history department now, we now have a GIS map of where all of our students are in terms of fellowships that have been received, graduate schools that they're in, and job placements. And we don't attribute student information to it. We say the position and the place with it, but it's becoming quite a robust map that people can engage with. And then our students, we can point to it and say, hey, you're applying for this fellowship. We've had somebody apply, we've had somebody win. Let's get you in touch with them to see if there's anything can happen, or hey, you want to go into this industry? Let me give you X, Y, and Z as people, and sort of really doing some of the things that that Matthew just mentioned with this program.
We also have an internship program, which is structured very similar to the one described by Dr. Romaniello. And we're a very small place, which makes it possible for me to work really closely with our single career development person. I think we're hiring a second one. That program's going to, double in size. But that's been really helpful to me because she often has ideas about things that students can do beyond what I do. So, for example, I had a student who last year did an internship at a local insurance agency, and she loved it and had originally been thinking about law school, but decided maybe law school wasn't for her. She wanted to get out in the world and work for a while and see what happened. And she is now happily working at an insurance agency, and all is well. And this was in part because of the connections that Career Services already had and was able to leverage on our behalf. And then at the end of the semester, they can do a project or they can write some sort of a paper. So she wrote a paper connecting the skills that she had learned in our classes to the work that she was doing at her internship, which was really quite successful. I've really tried to start highlighting the things that the upper level students are doing in internships so that my first years and sophomores can start thinking, what kind of things can I do in an internship? And really see that as something that they want to do and that they are going to do and spend some time thinking really deliberately about. We've also been trying to reach out to our alumni more. We have fewer of them. But a couple of weeks ago, I was actually able to have one come to a class and talk to us about local archives and local research, which was really fabulous. And students really enjoyed seeing someone who was an alumni and they could relate to in that way.
Thank you for those examples. Does anyone else want to speak on this issue? Beyond traditional history fields, maybe what are there things that you've already done in addition to alumni networks that might help make this more evident to students that the majority of history majors don't become historians?
I think what's key is being able to ground it to things that your students have done, your alumni have done in your department. I know our old What Can You Do with a History Major spoke about these sort of, you could be president because, Teddy Roosevelt was the president or something along those lines, or a history, former president. And it doesn't connect in the same way. I don't think these sort of grand historical examples of people that were history majors connect in the same way as it does if you can point to tangible examples of what your alumni are doing. I think that speaks way more to students to say, hey, this is a viable thing to do with the degree, in the same way that we spoke earlier that students can very clearly attribute nursing or other degrees with an outcome. If we can point to alumni, we can very clearly associate the history major with the same sort of career outcomes that other majors are very good at articulating.
I've also found it's really helpful to have other publications. I'm thinking particularly of the Perspectives in History publication, highlighting things that careers that people have with history degrees that are not things that you might expect. Because I rip those pages out of the magazine and I stick them up outside my door. There's one in particular that I remember because Girl Scouting is dear to my heart, and it was about someone who worked in Girl Scouting doing grant work who had a history.
I'm afraid we might have lost some of that, Bonnie. I think the connection is lost. Hopefully we'll get her back soon. Before you need to go, Matthew Romaniello, is there anything else you'd like to say, sort of final thoughts on this and what the process has been like? Bonnie, we'll ask you to finish that in a second.
I'll just say that I think as for us, I think Career Day has been amazingly successful. Our administration loves it. Other programs keep on trying to sneak their students into our Career Day, and we're like, no, this is just for historians as a model. But I think it's good for our students to see what recent graduates have done. I think it's good for them to be building relationships in the community. It's good for them to have that opportunity to see how their skills translate. I think even if we didn't have the internships happen as a result of that, I think just having those conversations on campus in the department, and we're always building that in as part of our capstone sequence. That's how it's timed so that those students come from the first half of the capstone to going to Career Day before they get to their projects. I think that's been really meaningful for our students and thinking about it. I think where we need to be more effective is probably having them come at the start of the program, not just at the end of the program, so they realize that it's the entirety of it is important for that process.
Thank you very much. Now you are free to go teach your class. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. We have a couple questions in the Q&A that I'd like to turn to now. There were a couple questions that I think Michelle Deasy from QA Commons can address. So I put those to her, and I expect to be able to answer those in a typed answer in the Q&A. So look for that by the end if Michelle can address them. But additional questions, I'm going to kind of go in order that they're related to what we were just talking about. So one is, I wonder if the presenters could speak to the question of engaging alums to talk to students versus engaging former history majors from other schools who might be doing work that your alums have historically not gone into, but you think would be a good fit for them. Is there something about hearing from an alum that engages the students in a special way? Or do you think it would also work to have these alums from other institutions?
Well, I think that, right, the idea of alumni from other institutions is entirely useful, but I think that the value of our own alum is, okay, what can you do with a history degree from this university? It directly places the students in that role. And right, we've got one alum who was a civil rights advisor for 5 US presidents. Okay, that's the kind of thing where you can have a student say, yeah, I want to be that kind of inspiration, you know?
Yes, thank you. If others want to address that, feel free. Otherwise, I'll go to the next question. Okay. We have received a request for a little bit more about what the process was. And here's a question from Rob Choret. I know some of you mentioned the idea that this work could be framed as, this isn't about doing anything differently, but were there realizations that you did in fact need to do some things differently in order to prepare your students better?
I feel like both halves of that question are almost different things. The realizations that I had during the process wasn't so much that I had to do something differently. It's that I didn't understand necessarily what I was already doing or what we were already doing in many different ways. So I remember a Zoom conversation we had with Michelle at one point where I just like, I do not even understand the question that you're asking me on this form. You need to explain to me exactly what you mean because this is beyond my realm of comprehension. I see some nodding. Probably went through the same thing. After that explanation, I'm like, oh, okay. And so it's not I've seen something new. It's like, oh, I've seen this thing that I already knew in a different light. So it really is not a big change. But it is a huge change in the way you look at things.
Yeah, I think that's a very important takeaway from the process is, right, that when I was compiling the report, I was sitting there expecting the feedback to say, look, I expected the negative feedback right? You need to do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, straighten everything out. And because, right, I was convinced that our faculty members were operating in their own individualized spaces, and we had no sense of what was going on. Turns out, no, that we're more coherent than we realize. We just didn't understand it.
Thank you. Another question is from Leslie Taggart. I'm sure you'll get to this, but what kinds of language have you switched to in order to achieve your goal? So are there specific examples of terms, or Jonathan, like that conversation about what the form was asking for, specific examples you can share with attendees in terms of, I used to think, but now I realize.
Let me think. So just had the SLO conversation the other day. The easy one, which we were already doing, was digital literacy. It's one of their SLOs. It wasn't one of ours. I already knew we were doing it. That wasn't a gigantic change. Another one is professionalism, which I didn't even imagine is something that I was teaching. But honestly, we all are just trying to get people to fill the seats every day and do things in a timely manner. I think that's very important. Initiative is another one I was very fond of. Like, are your students taking initiative and creating things themselves without you having to just be there all the time for them? And that's the sort of thing that carries on across sub-disciplines in history. It carries on across different levels of classes. And it is a way to bring together things that we were already doing anyway, but I don't think we really understood.
Thanks. Another question from Phil Katz. So how much of this process was an exercise in translation from history practices to career practices? And how does it go beyond the traditional defense of the humanities as practical? Again, that kind of, where does the rubber meet the road in terms of this transition in your thinking? At least that's how I'm interpreting the question.
I think it's more than just translation, because it requires a different set of practices from the individuals that are doing it, the set of practices of what are the ways that you're actually engaging with different stakeholders than you would if you were just focused on the content of the classes that you're teaching. And it's in that move, which I guess could be a translation move, it's in that move to the idea of what is the why for your program? Is the why for your program continuing to sort of reify your content knowledge that you in some ways are set with because you're in your position that you are? Or is it trying to make sure that students find their calling or find their vocation in a variety of different ways? And I think that is the biggest mindset shift that we're experiencing at the moment, which is absolutely the stuff that we teach is fascinating and interesting and 100% things that students should hear and learn. But at the end of the day, finding the why so that students can get to that vocation. So it's more than just translation. It's sort of a shift in student purpose, I find.
Thanks for that. Did any of you, this is a question from Tim Roberts, did any panelists encounter skepticism from area non-history traditional employers about coming to campus to talk to history majors? And if so, how did you overcome that?
I think if you just tell them what you're doing. So often I get conversations, and I think we've mentioned this in the panel before, they're like, oh, I didn't know history did that. And so I think if the employer is willing to pick up the phone to have a conversation about coming, then more than likely there's an area that you can talk about common grounds between it. So I've not had somebody that I've had a conversation with say anything about, oh, I'm not going to become because they're a history major. because there's certainly, I think, industry maybe recognizes more than even some universities do about certainly the values that those particular students can bring if you just have a conversation.
Okay, I think we have 2 more questions. I think we can do it. This is an interesting one about sort of the curriculum and the program. How has working with QA Commons affected or changed the student experiences of non-history majors who do take survey or gen ed history courses? Is there any reflection of the work in those introductory courses? Or is this mostly just confined to kind of the experiences that history majors themselves have? I will address this a little bit. If someone wants to take a look at the history gateways, there's a web page, and then we have this booklet about introductory history courses. And employability was definitely something that even in intro courses, a number of faculty were thinking about. Even if it's, you know, building those college skills so that they can succeed in college more generally. The idea of a service department, I know, is not always something people want, but being able to serve your students well is something everybody wants to do. So whether that's happening in an intro course or other upper level courses, I definitely have seen it in a lot of places. So, but anyway, if one of you guys could address what non-history majors might have experienced in your department now versus before.
Well, I think I did say before that we changed all of our SLOs except for one to use some of the ones that QA Commons had offered. And those are obviously going to show up in the intro courses. I mean, the bigger step is to treat your SLOs as something that you're actually bringing up in class. And I think that's going to be a learning process for all the professors involved as to the value of that. But at least in theory, it should change the experience for everybody in a history course at our university.
I think in some ways it also builds an investment in the classes for everybody. If we're serious about the tagline that everything has a history, that means the majors that they're in have a history to them. And so then hopefully this helps bring that out, but then also helps give them a so what. So why am I in a history class? Well, here is X, Y, and Z that we're giving in terms of soft skills. Here's X, Y, and Z in terms of employability skills that regardless of your major are going to be something that you can benefit from coming out of this class beyond the content or the other maybe more specific history things that are being done.
Thank you. Well, we are right up against the end of the hour. If anyone else has anything that they'd like to add. I think this has really been helpful for me and for attendees to see the range of things you guys are doing and to recognize something that has come up, at least for me before, that it seems like maybe we don't know what we're doing, but we do. And that's always a valuable and encouraging lesson for historians to hear. Another important thing to take away is that you're not alone. Your department isn't alone. There are a lot of shared concerns and possibilities for history programs, as well as we well know, a lot of pressures as well. So this concludes preparing history students for the workforce. Faculty perspectives on EEQ certification. We hope it was a helpful and productive event for you. And another note before we close, the AHA is working on a new edition of its popular booklet, Careers for History Majors, which should be available late this year. We encourage you to keep an eye out for an announcement when it is in print. When it appears, departmental members will receive a copy. Others will be able to order it online. If you're not a member of the AHA, we hope you'll consider joining to support programs like this. A recording of today's event will be emailed to you when it's available. Questions or feedback can be sent to ahaonline@historians.org. Thank you for attending.